we have Don Letts on the couch today, a man who is famously the in-house DJ at the Roxy and original punky reggae party starter, and also a world-famous filmmaker and documenter. And he's going to be showing us film, playing us music. We'll be listening to some Big Audio Dynamite, as well as some of the music that he was playing back then when those cultures clashed. But first off, he's going to treat us to something of a reading from his autobiography. Over to you, Mr. Letts.
Morning, all. This is just to give you a bit of context and background.
This version is way from creation.
Thank you.
Thunder in one hand, lightning in the other.
I'm spoiling for a fight.
And spoiling for a fight. So I think you should take us to the DJ booth at the Roxy with your single deck. What was there in the booth with you, and what were you seeing in front of you?
Oh, man. Well, the Roxy, I mean, when people look back at things, they kind of look through rose-tinted glasses. But to be honest with you, it was a right shithole. It was a basement. But the thing about these clubs is they really played an important part in the whole process. Because for a movement to really be a proper movement, you need the music, you need the players, and you need a place for them to congregate and exchange ideas. And the Roxy was the very first punk club. And as I said, weren't no punk records to play. I'm playing dub reggae. And what was interesting is the white working class youth really dug the sounds. They dug, I guess they obviously dug the anti-establishment vibe of the whole thing, somewhat obviously. They loved the bass lines. They loved the fact that the lyrics were about something. It was like musical reportage. You know, when my man's singing, I need a roof over my head, or Chant Down Babylon, they could relate to that because the Pistols were singing Anarchy in the UK and the Clash was singing White Riot. They didn't mind the weed either. And what else was beautiful about this thing is there was this kind of interesting cultural exchange whereby their music is starting to be informed by what I'm playing. And you can hear that in the songs of the Clash. You can hear definite reggae bass lines. You can hear Joe Strummer referencing Prince Far I or Dr. Elementado. Later on, when the Pistols broke up and Public Image was doing their thing, it was all about the bass line. Slits, another great example of the punky reggae crossover. What reggae got out of it really was exposure, which isn't something to be underestimated, you know what I mean? I mean, back in the day, it wasn't that popular a sound, and two things really pushed it to the forefront. Three things: Harder They Come, the punk scene, and Bob Marley. So it was a beautiful thing to see these people getting on by understanding our differences rather than trying to be the same. And I'm really a product of that, what they now call the punky reggae party. And it really is a testament to the strength of culture, being able to bring people closer together. Christian.
Yeah, you just mentioned, this is like ping pong, verbal ping pong. You just mentioned the three things, Bob Marley, Harder They Come, the film, and punk. And all those three things are relevant to your kind of career and your musical journey.
No shit, Sherlock.
Indeed. So let's pick, I think we want to talk more about punk. We want to talk about the Harder They Come and the films that you've gone on to make. But just for a minute, tell us about your relationship with Bob Marley, because you went backstage, didn't you, at a gig and got yourself in there to go and say hello to the man.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I was lucky enough to strike up a relationship with Bob.
Tell us. Tell us about you. What were you like then, and how did you get yourself past whoever it was and up the stairs, and what did you see in the room when you got there?
Just about to do that, young lady. Anyway, I'm at the gig, famous gig, Lyceum in London, and it was the most exciting gig I've ever seen in my life. It was like a religious experience. After the show, I get in my car, and I'm a precocious brat, you know what I mean? I got a bit of lip on me. I get in my car, I follow the coach to the hotel in Chelsea, and when all the road crew are loading off the shit and the band are walking in, I kind of sneak in behind them and sit in the corner of Bob Marley's room, while Bob sits in the middle of the table holding court, smoking weed, and basically burning herb till like 3 in the morning and the sun was rising. By about 4 o'clock, after he'd out-reasoned and out-smoked everybody, he turns and sees me in the corner with my little pathetic bag of... Listen, I don't want to sound like I'm selling drugs. It's kind of old school. And I hope you guys are taking a different route, but this is how it was back in the day. Anyway, I'm smoking my little bag of weed, and he summons me to the table. And basically proceeded to reason with me and finish my weed, of course. After that, you know, we kind of had a bit of a relationship in that he was staying here for 6 months. And, God, here I am again. I'm going to say it again. I was selling him weed. I don't do it anymore. And it's interesting, because the last time I spoke to Bob, we had an argument, because I'd gone around there, because while he was here in London, the whole punk thing had exploded. So I'm round at Bob's in my bondage trousers. And I walk in, and Bob's like, Don Letts, what are you dealing with? You look like one of them nasty blood clot punk rockers. In English, that's Don Letts, what are you dealing with? You look like a nasty punk rocker. He'd been reading the tabloid press that had really portrayed a kind of negative view of the whole movement. You know, that it was all about nihilism and safety pins, and it was never about that. It was about freedom and empowerment and individuality. Anyway, Bob starts to take the piss out of me because I'm wearing the punk trousers, and I'm like, yo, dude, you're wrong. These are my friends. You know, you don't know what's going on. And basically, left telling him, well, I didn't tell him to go fuck himself. I wasn't that brave. But basically, I walked out of there defending the punks. 3 months later, after Bob became somewhat more informed, he was moved to pen that tune, Punky Reggae Party. So, you know, I always figured I got the last laugh with that. But,
What did you talk about in that? Do you remember the conversation that you had at the table?
Come on, 35 years ago. I mean, needless to say, I was totally taken. And I'm not one for heroes, but I ain't gonna lie to you. I'm sitting in front of this guy. You've got to understand what Bob Marley represented to my generation. You know, I'm what they call first generation British-born black. And that kind of rolls off the tongue now. Back in the late 60s, early 70s, trust me, this was a really confusing concept. There was no blueprint for this new kind of social experiment. But we had the music, so we knew what we were supposed to sound like. But there was no visual accompaniment. We never knew really the cultural details. We never know what we visually looked like. And then two things happened. Bob came on the scene, and Harder They Come, the movie, which was a major inspiration to me. And that kind of completed the cultural package, if you know what I mean, because no longer was it just a soundtrack. It had an attitude, it had a look, it had lyrics, and that was very empowering for my generation, because we were like a lost tribe, man. You know what I mean? Once I heard Bob, I was tooled up and ready to go. Don't know where, but I was ready.
You mentioned The Harder They Come again there. Did you know about the film before you saw it?
I think by reputation we'd heard about it, but it came to London in the late 70s. And again, mind-blowing for this lost tribe that are looking for clues as to what they were about. And it was after seeing that film that I got the vibe that, okay, I want to express myself visually, because I really dug the way that it could be entertaining and informative at the same time, which, you know, music does as well, or has that potential to do. So, okay, I'm like, okay, I want to express myself visually, but how the hell do you do that? Back in those days, the film business was kind of an old boys network. So I had this idea, didn't know what to do, and then what happens? Late 70s, punk rock explodes. The whole DIY ethic. You know, this energy so infectious, as I said in my book, you wanted to be part of it. It wasn't a spectator sport. All my white brethren are picking up guitars. Soon the stage is full up, and Don Letts wants to pick up something too. I pick up a Super 8 camera, inspired by the punk DIY ethic, and start to film the bands. And then one day I read in one of the music press, Don Letts is making a punk rock movie. And I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. I'll call it a movie. Stuck the shit together, showed it at this art place called the ICA, and that effectively was my first film, all with the power and inspiration of punk rock. Having said that, soon afterwards, once I'd got through that door, got on that platform, I started to get my technical shit together, kind of. But basically, during that period, formed relationships with many of the bands, and went on to make videos for Clash and Public Image and a shitload more. And I've probably made about 300-400 videos to date. Don't do them anymore because the music doesn't do that for me. Well, the people that have the money to make videos don't have the, you know what I'm saying? It's the people that ain't saying nothing that got the money to make videos. Anyway, next question.
I quite like this. So, just back to the Harder They Come for a minute. You saw that at the Ritzy in Brixton.
Yep.
I understand. That film's really important for lots of reasons. You've got the look, you've got the swagger, you've got the soundtrack.
Yeah, attitude, yeah. I mean, basically, it reflected Jamaican punk rock.
But did that film inspire you in a direct way to be involved with clothes and fashion because you had a store?
No, man, I'm a black man. What are you talking about? That's in my DNA. That's in my DNA. Give me a break.
I apologise for
No,
the
but
assumption.
seriously, it's in my DNA. That's in my blood. But it definitely, that was just, you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
The swagger is always strong.
But it definitely kind of gave you a bit more of a swagger, you know, because it was kind of certified, you know.
So how did you start playing records? Now, obviously, I know, and we'll talk about how you started a shop, Acme Attractions, people started coming down there. It was more than just a shop. And then the Roxy essentially started as a place for people to go after they'd been hanging out at your shop.
Sort of,
and
yeah.
you played records there. Now, was there a point before of this where you were playing records at parties or in any other capacity? Or
No.
Did you start playing records because of the Roxy?
No. What happened was, because I'm a black man, I'll be playing records at home, which I did, you know what I mean? We all did. As a kid, I was playing records at home like everybody else. When I started to run this shop on the Kings Road, Chelsea, called Acme Attractions, which, funny enough, again, going back to how important scenes are, back in my day, shops were these kind of cultural centres where fashion and new music movements did emerge. And on the Kings Road, there was two shops, Acme Attractions and a shop owned by a guy called a woman called Vivian Westwood and Malcolm McLaren, I'm sure you're familiar with. And these were the two places that all the kind of hip young people that were looking for something else gravitated towards. Now, in Vivian and Malcolm's shop, they were a bit more Eurocentric. In my shop, dub reggae all day long. And what was interesting is that pulled in as many of the customers as the clothes did. In fact, probably more. Didn't I just say this in my book? The fact that the owner of the shop saw the response of the customers to the bass lines. When he opened the Roxy, he said, Don, have a go at DJing. And I'd never DJed in my life. And luckily, there was only one working deck there, so I guess I never really learned. I'm joking. But
I didn't stop Shaka.
it was interesting, because Shaka, I think he still uses one deck. But in those days, the space between the records was almost as important as the records themselves. You could kind of feel the temperature of the room. You know, you could gauge the climate. So there'd be like, depending what I was doing, a couple of seconds gap, or maybe even a minute gap, depending who was bending my ear. But it was very low tech, because it really wasn't about technique. I didn't have any technique. All I had was taste. You know what I mean? As long as I was dropping the right tunes, the people were happy. In fact, it was interesting. When the punks did start to release records and get signed up, I'd occasionally drop one of those records in, and the punks would be like, "Nah, leave that out, Don. Just keep playing reggae."
Interesting. I mean, some people here in the audience will have seen a sound system DJ, maybe Shaka or some of the other people, and seen or have an understanding of how people used to play or sometimes do still play with one deck. Would you mind just kind of breaking down for us how, I know you've kind of touched on this, but how would you DJ on one deck? Apart from the obvious answer of putting one record on and taking it off. I'm interested in this idea of having...
Because I'm going to have to say to you, lady, I just told you. Big gaps in between the records, you feel the temperature of the room, but basically there was just gaps, and you get a record, you stick it on, and...
But would you do sound effects as well?
Effects? We didn't know about no sound effects. The sound effects were the people in the room. It was, like I said, it was really low tech. It was all about the selection. And in fact, to this day, my only talent is really as a selector. You know, when I DJ out now, I'm using CDs. I don't beat match. I don't scratch. It's just about the selection. For me, and I appreciate the technique, but from that day till this, for me, it's always been about content.
And that's
over technique.
That's absolutely what I was getting at.
Yeah.
So if you're DJing on one deck and it's just the kind of technique of what other people now think of as DJing isn't really relevant, how do you select, or how do you select?
Well, it's all about taste. Lucky I got some. I don't know how else to answer that, honestly. It's all about, I mean, yeah, you know, when you go and see DJ, you're basically buying into his taste and selection, and that's it.
What would be a kind of classic first night tune for you at the Roxy, and what will be a classic last night tune? Last tune of the night tune.
Man, you're going back now. But, you know, I mean, anything from sort of Prince Farai, Iroy, Uroy, Tapazuki, any dubs by a gentleman who's no longer with us called Keith Hudson. There's a particular dub album you should get. It's a classic called Pick a Dub. That would be an end of night kind of thing.
And do you have something you can play us as well to illustrate sonically what we're talking about?
Sonically, sure. I can do that.
Because it's always good to talk, but it's also good to listen.
Okay. Is this working for you all? You all understand what I'm saying and everything? You're all from everywhere, right? Are there any non-English speaking people here? Sorry, dude. I'll come and have a word with you after. Okay. All right, kind of thing I would have played down here. Here we go. Track 14. Before I play this, another thing I've got to say is I noticed there's a famous book called England's Dreaming, written by a guy called John Savage. And he said he thought another reason that the punks liked the reggae breaks in between the live sets is that people tend to forget that 90% of these punk bands sounded fucking awful. So when I started to play a tune, they were really glad to hear some music. You know what I'm saying?
All the stations, this station supply all...
Kind of strange to be playing it in this atmosphere, but cool anyway.
Where did you get your records?
Huh? Oh, you really set yourself up, don't you? My local reggae shop. But, I mean, back in, again, this is the day when record shops were thriving, and every Friday night you'd get imports from Jamaica, and you'd go there with your money, if you're lucky, if you had some, and you'd sit there and the shopkeeper would be just playing tunes, and you'd give a little signal, and I want that, and that's it, really. But the thing to have was what they call white labels and pre-releases. Kind of, I guess, does that exist anymore? White labels?
Well, dub plate culture is
Yeah,
alive
okay.
and well.
But yeah, just your local Jamaican reggae shop. And there was a lot of them back in those days. Every community had one or two shops.
And where was yours?
Brixton, Cold Harbour Lane.
Was that Black or Dread, or was it a different shop back then?
Touch me, young lady. Black or Dread, that's right. That's right. You don't look that old.
They've stymied me by by saying something positive.
No, you don't look that old. I mean, right, anyway, he's still around, isn't he?
Yeah, of course, Black or Dread. It's a legendary Brixton record shop. So, did you used to? Okay.
Sorry, I do that to all the ladies.
So, buying records in Brixton. Okay, tell us about Brixton when you were buying records.
Can't we move forward a bit? That's so long ago.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, and so we're going to leave the Roxy, we're going to leave Brixton for the moment, and perhaps we should move forward to your first forays actually into being involved with the making of music as opposed to just documenting it, which obviously you continue to do. You made an EP with Keith Levine and
Jar Wobble.
Jar Wobble.
Yeah,
that's the
that's
one.
an interesting thing, because that's a little blip on the Don Letts career. But basically, Keith Levine, Jar Wobble were original members of John Lydon's group Public Image, whose first couple of albums, if you don't know them. Get Metal Box, what's the first one called? Public Image, right? Sonically, fucking amazing. Trust me. Totally informed by dub, totally about bass lines. Keith and Wobble, and Wobble's a really accomplished, you all familiar with Jar Wobble? He's a really accomplished player now that's done shed loads of work, and again, his catalogue, body of work worth checking out. Anyway, back in whenever I made that record, 78, they decide they want to earn some extra money, because we were all hustlers, you know, it has to be said. Creative hustlers, but hustling nevertheless. They're looking to get some more money from Virgin, stroke Richard Branson, and they blagged some studio time to make a record. And they're in there messing around, trying to do some reggae kind of thing, and they asked me to have a go at the lyrics. So I'm sitting in the toilet somewhere with a mic, writing lyrics, trying to get something together. And I'm like, okay, I've got the shape of an idea, and I'll come back tomorrow to finish it off. Next day, I don't hear from them. Week later, I don't hear from them. 2 weeks later, I don't hear from them. 4 weeks later, there's a fucking record on the stand. Don Letts, Steel Leg, what is it called? whatever, anyway. They bloody put out me demoing in the toilet trying to work out the lyrics. They actually released that thing.
Steel Leg versus Electric Dread.
That's right. And then there was a guy on the cover of the record with a bag over his head that's not me. And everybody thought that was. I was so pissed off about it. Basically, because I'd written these lyrics, and the title of the song was called Highly Unlikely. And it was about my conflict with aspects of Rastafari. So I was kind of sticking my neck out, because where I come from, you can take a lot of shit from that, but I'm that kind of guy. So I did these controversial lyrics, which they didn't take so seriously, because they were looking to make some money. Anyway, that's that story.
It's interesting, you just brought up this idea, or you just mentioned...
Crap record. Which is worse. It's the biggest offence, actually, when I think about it. It could have been great. Go on.
Well, OK, so you could tell us some things about how you deal with those knockbacks when they happen, but what's actually interesting about what you're saying then is this idea of the tension that comes with being an originator, or the tension that comes from being someone who will be the bridge between two communities or two worlds, and you very much were that person. What kind of problems or benefits did that, the benefits I suppose are obvious, but what's the downside of being that person who's willing to be the bridge?
The downside?
I mean, you're talking about possibly getting flack from people.
Oh, well, I mean, the thing is, when I was growing up, I grew up in Brixton. I now live in West London. I don't know if it means anything to you guys. It was a strong black community I grew up as a young kid. And I was always the freak on the block. Might have something to do with the fact that I wasn't that much physical a person. I was a little tubby, if I remember rightly. I was fat, fuck it. And I wore glasses. I didn't do the football thing. I wasn't that macho. I'd be in the backyard, like, trying to do experiments. And I was basically, I guess, the kind of nerd. And I used to take a lot of stick from that, but it was all character-building stuff. And I don't know where it came from, but I was never into following the herd. You know, as a young... You can understand, I grew up listening to music that was about empowering yourself. It was about individuality. It was about expanding your mind. You know, when I'm growing up, I'm listening to Bob Marley. I'm listening to James Brown saying, "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud." I'm listening to Gil Scott-Heron. You know, I'm reading books by the Black Panthers. And this shit just kind of empowered you. You wanted to do something. And that was instilled in me for the whole American civil rights movement. I mean, going through all those things kind of politicized me and made me realize that I was going to decide what I was about. I wasn't going to have society tell me what I was about. And it wasn't like I sat down and thought this shit up. You know, I guess you kind of built that way or you ain't. You know what I mean? But I definitely wasn't in the following. I remember when I was a kid going to see like Marvin Gaye and sitting in the audience and thinking, okay, Marvin, you're the man, you're great, but what about me? Is my purpose on life to give you all my energy? What is my role? You know, surely I've got something to give. And I remember thinking that shit, not knowing where these thoughts were going to go. And it all came into focus with punk rock. What did you ask me?
I actually don't know, but that was really interesting. It was about the tension between
Okay, and
that
as regards to the
person.
tension, other than my black friends laughing at me when I used to walk around Brixton in my punk rock clothes, I'll be honest with you, it worked for me. And I really think about it. I think people secretly admire that shit. I didn't need to be blessed by society. I decided to go down this road and I took what came, but it ain't been bad. I mean, damn. No, it ain't been bad at all.
Well, no, clearly not.
No.
So do you think for you, sort of the music that you've been involved with, the documenting it, is essentially a political act?
Whoa. Political. I guess political with a small p. I mean, I'm a great believer that, you know, you can pollute the world with bad films and bad music just like you can pollute it with chemicals. And as I said, I grew up with music that was about changing your mind, not changing your fucking sneakers. So I believe in the potential of music and film to communicate, exchange and inspire and push things forward, man. As naive as it sounds, you know, make the world a slightly better place, you know, than it is now. And I've seen it happen. You know, I played reggae down at the Roxy and, you know, made some bonds with people that have lasted till this very day. You know, a lot of the musical moves you see going on in the UK now are totally informed by that cultural mix, you know, and lessons learnt from the whole Jamaican experience.
So specifically, where do you see that? I mean, obviously it's everywhere, but tell me.
No, it's not everywhere.
No. Okay, so it's not everywhere. But
No,
where do you see that influence in what's happening today then?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I don't know where the rest of you are from, but in the UK, and I think even in America to an extent, to me the culture's become increasingly conservative. I mean, it feels to me like punk rock never happened. There's a lot of people that don't want to change anything. They're happy with the way things are. They want to get sponsored. I nearly shot myself in the foot there. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Well, a lot of people are making music to buy. They want to be on the red carpet at MTV. They want all that cult celebrity shit. It's not that politicized or reactionary. It's not making that much social commentary. Now, let me be very clear about this. I think that's the mass. Luckily, I get to travel, and I do know that there's young people out there that don't want all that shit, that are kind of creating their own rules, operating outside that framework, and are actually doing something constructive. But it ain't what you see in the charts, and it ain't what you see on MTV. You know, where is Chuck D? Where is KRS-One? You know what I mean? Who are they opening the door for now? It's Snoop Dogg and Puff Daddy and Kanye West. Why are they opening the door for these guys? Because they don't upset the status quo. It's entertainment. And we're back in that vibe. But, you know, like I say, I get to travel, and I do know that there's young people out there operating outside that system. They don't want what the man's offering. And they've got that attitude, man. You know, I mean, I think it's out there. You just got to look in new places. I mean, the spirit of punk and the attitude of punk, it's like the Force in Star Wars. You can't stop it. You might have to look in new places, but ultimately I'm optimistic.
There's an interesting thing. I remember someone asking Malcolm McLaren, I don't know, it was like 10 years ago or something, a long time after punk, you know, how would you be punk now? And he said very simply, don't buy anything. Which I thought was
power,
really
radical.
interesting.
Yeah.
Really interesting idea. And Vivian Westwood has been talking about this again recently, about not buying stuff. So do you think maybe, you talked a minute ago about like making records that was about empowerment, not about buying new
consumerism, you know, yeah.
So again, if you're a young artist, how do you avoid, because it's such a overwhelming wave of pressure to consume, and this idea that you are what you own, not that you are what you do or that you create. How would you recommend young artists start moving towards kind of conspicuous creativity rather than conspicuous consumerism?
You know something, I've got to be honest with you, it ain't something you can recommend. These, you know, you've either fucking got it or you ain't. It ain't something you can buy into or learn. I don't believe that. I think it's something you instinctively have or you don't. And, you know, good luck to those that want to be on MTV, great. But, you know, the road that I travel is a little harder. I ain't financially rich. But if you look at the big picture and look at the cards that people are dealt on a day-to-day basis, I'm a goddamn billionaire. Do you know what I'm saying? And I ain't talking about cash. I'm talking about something that's up here. And I ain't going to insult you by pretending you can, you know, teach you to go down that road. If you want it, it's there for the taking. And it might be a little harder, and you might not do all that stuff that others kind of chase. But, yeah, I don't know how to answer that, really.
But that's
Yeah,
enough.
that's some sort of answer. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I think it makes perfect sense.
Okay, good. I'm not sure.
No, it does.
Because you ask me for some things I don't really think about, which is good. I like that.
But I suppose the point is that even if it's instinctive or not instinctive, it's good to be aware of it, because sometimes this, some things in culture aren't necessarily obvious to you unless you think about it or someone talks about it. So even mentioning that you can or cannot choose to be in that world or not in that world is useful.
You totally confused me, but trying to adapt what you're saying, I think the only thing you can do is, I was going to say not even lead by example, but, you know, you kind of, you do what you do, and like-minded people would connect to that and be inspired by it. Mm-hmm. But as regards to actually trying to teach somebody something, I don't think I'm that good yet. I'm working towards it, but I ain't that good yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess right now we should probably move back to some music. Now, the band that you were involved with over a period of 4 albums was Big Audio Dynamite.
Yeah, very proud of BAD, man.
And a fantastic band, and a band who...
Any of you know this old... You're not all too young, you were probably all sperm when they were around, right?
Pre-sperm.
Anybody know Big Audio Dynamite? Nah. Damn.
But, you know, you're in a room full of music aficionados. You're in a room with people who care about music and are interested in finding out about music they don't know. So perhaps you can, for the people that don't know, can you tell us what was Big Audio Dynamite?
Big Audio Dynamite was Mick Jones. Do you know The Clash?
Because, of course, we haven't even really talked about any of that.
Big Audio Dynamite, you should have followed it through. Anyway, Mick Jones's band after The Clash was called Big Audio Dynamite. And our thing was Jamaican bass lines, New York beats, mixed rock and roll guitar, and me taking care of dialogues and samples. I believe we were the band that we had the first hit record that was covered in samples and movie dialogue. This is way back in, when was that band? I can't remember, when was I in the band? Mid-80s or something, and the whole dialogue sample thing hadn't really happened yet. I mean, we released a track called Medicine Show that had like 60 seconds lifted from The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. We used a lot of found sounds and movie soundtracks. And that was really my department. I think what's interesting about this whole thing is I made 4 albums with those guys. I got my gold discs. I can't play a fucking thing. And that's why Mick got me in the group. I mean, when he first asked me, I ain't gonna lie to you, we were in a club and it was me and my other Rasta brethren, Leo. And he's standing between us and he thought we looked good and that was enough for him. He's like, Don, join the group. And I'm like, but Mick, I can't play anything. And he reminded me that Paul Simonon actually started to learn to play the bass by having stickers on his on the fret of his bass. I guess the difference would be, and he actually, well, he obviously moved on to taking the stickers off. I never took my stickers off the fucking keyboard. When I played live, I'd hold up the keyboard and show the audience, basically letting them know that if they had the ideas and they had the balls, they could do this thing too. And that's why I came up with the whole sample dialogue thing. I couldn't do anything musically, but I wanted to contribute. I wanted to justify my space in that band. So at first I started concentrating on the samples and the dialogue, which I've got to say we did really fucking well. But none of the tracks were based on samples and the dialogue. I've got to tell you that well. It wasn't like Kanye West where if you take the sample away, there's nothing left. Do you know what I mean? It was just like adding some salt and pepper. But my real contribution to the band, to me, is the lyrics. I'm just thinking about it because people really were buzzing on the dialogue. But I was, like I said, I wanted to justify my space. So I got my lyrical head together, started to try writing lyrics, and came at it from a kind of film perspective, as if I'm writing little scripts or treatments. And I think that's why a lot of the songs have this kind of cinematic quality. And, you know, I co-wrote, I guess, 90% of the songs on that album, on all the albums. And the first hit single we had was the first thing I ever wrote, other than that stupid Keith Levine thing. A track called E equals MC squared, but way before y'all's time.
I think you
but
should,
I'm really proud of it.
I think you should play us something. You should select a
track?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll play you a bit of two. I am really proud of BAD, I ain't gonna lie. It's good when you can big up yourself, isn't it? Okay, this is Medicine Show from the first album. A good example of the combination of Jamaican bass line, New York beats, dialogue, and rock and roll guitar. Thank you.
So a bit of sampling in there.
Yeah. And it's
what-
interesting, I mean, you could never get away with that shit now. I mean, there's like, and they're big movies, I guess movies that are before your time, particularly a lot of spaghetti westerns, Sergio Leone films like The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. And also, you know, where you got the samples from, you know, it was steeped in cultural references. It wasn't just a sound for sound's sake. Do you know what I mean? Whose phone's that? No?
Not
Okay.
mine.
Okay. I was going to answer it. Anyway, sorry, go on.
So you're saying, so your job in the band was to select the samples.
Yeah, I mean, one of the guys were kind of laying down the tracks. I'd be in the green room watching movies and kind of looking, you know, actively looking for stuff. But it was between that and coming up with the lyrics. I mean, basically, because I couldn't play anything, it was about trying to justify my space. It wasn't enough for me to just hang in the group. And I got to say, if I had any regret in this life, it was probably not learning to play. Although I think if I could play an instrument, whoa, with the ego, I'd be a... But the difference is that, you know, I think if I could play with an instrument and say, no, I want it to go like this, there would be more equity in the studio, and I wouldn't, you know, I always felt slightly on the back foot, you know what I'm saying? Because I wasn't able to go, look, fuck you, it should go like this. You know what I mean? So ultimately, yeah, I wish I had learned to play. Yeah, I know, it would have been better. It would have been better. But God, I would have been a pain to live with.
But the sampling, I mean, obviously I know you co-wrote as well, so it wasn't just the kind of, you know, finding sounds.
Yeah.
But that was one of the first bands that really took sampling to a mainstream audience. Yep. What was your relationship with hip-hop and hip-hop culture at this point?
That's an interesting question. Whoa. Back in the early 80s, 81, 82, The Clash played a legendary 23 shows back to back in New York City. And I was lucky enough to be there to document it all. And it's interesting because just as there'd been a punky reggae connection in London, by the time the Clash hit New York City, punk had already kind of gained a reputation. And the hip-hop kids kind of dug the whole DIY anti-establishment thing. I mean, let's face it, it's very appealing to young people. You know, fuck you, let's do it ourselves. Who's going to argue with that? So the Clash are playing these 21 dates. The graffiti writers are coming to check us out. The Clash are putting on people like Grandmaster Flash to support them, which went down terribly, as to be said. I mean, they bottled Grandmaster Flash off the stage. Funny to look at where hip-hop is now. Anyway, but during that period, 81, 82, they began to form this kind of punky hip-hop party. In fact, I've done a couple of compilation soundtracks in my life. I might even have one in my bag. But there was this association between the punk and hip-hop scene. And I guess that would really manifest itself with that whole, what was it called, the whole new wave movement in out of New York.
Absolutely, that kind of post-punk.
Yeah, yeah. So again, another culture clash, and out of that mix came really interesting stuff.
It certainly did. But were you, I suppose if we just sort of link it directly to the stuff you were doing with BAD,
Yeah.
so were you particularly intrigued by technically how hip-hop guys were doing what they were doing? Were you kind of finding out how that happened, and how did you find out how they were doing what they were doing?
Listen, if you can imagine seeing somebody like Grandmaster Flash do the whole turntablism thing back in 80, 81. I mean, nowadays you can kind of take it for granted, but to see that for the first time, I can't tell you what a bomb that was.
So where did you see that for the first time?
Was it something called Disco Harlem or something in Brooklyn? I actually can't remember. You'd go to these places. I used to hang with a guy called Fab Five Freddy. Anybody familiar with him? And he used to take me down to Harlem, take me to Brooklyn, to these funky no-name places. Eventually, these people then ended up, funny enough, playing in another club in New York called the Roxy. That had, again, that was really built out of that punky hip-hop connection.
That was Lady Blues thing, wasn't it?
Okay, Roosa Blue, you got it. Yeah, no, to see him take those beats and double them up on the two, I mean, it was amazing shit, you know. And Mick Jones was obviously really excited by it because after he left the Clash, that's why I think he formed Big Audio Dynamite, trying to bring some of that kind of mentality into what he was doing.
And you certainly did. You had something else that you wanted to play us from that.
Well, I was just going to play another
era.
BAD thing that's a typical example of what we did. This is called Sight CMC. Jim Jarmusch actually made the video for this.
Come in, London. Come in, London.
As I was listening to that, I was just remembering how when we put it together in the studio, we were like, damn, how are we going to take this shit live? It was really important to us that we could recreate it live. And this is before like the Akai sampler and all that shit. And I had, what was it, an N-Sonic keyboard to trigger the sound samples. But I'd be flying in a lot of those spoken dialogues from a cassette machine, man. Live, you know what I mean? I mean, later on we got the Akai, whatever it was, I can't remember what it was called. But we could do that live, and you know, I'm really proud of that shit, I've got to say. Anyway.
Because there are really specific challenges around sampling at that point. That
not to mention getting sued.
Well, there's always that little pitfall. But obviously for people that are used to working with pretty much unlimited memory, it's hard, or it's easy to forget actually quite how difficult it was to do that stuff back then and how inventive you needed to be in order to do it.
Yeah, and I've got to say, I mean, from my experience, I mean, there's an expression, what is it, necessity is the mother of invention. And it seems to me that the less you had, the more creative it allowed you to be in a weird way. I don't know why. I mean, Lee Perry, most of you know Lee Perry. Okay, I mean, all of his dubs were done by bouncing between two 4-track machines. You know what I mean? That's how he created his sound. You know, so, and I think, you know, the whole punk rock ethic, you know, it was always about the idea more than the technical ability. I still believe to this day that a good idea attempted is better than a bad idea perfected. You know, there's a lot of technique out there, but what's really important to me anyway is the idea. You know, and that's really what I brought to the band, because I had no musical training. I had no rules. I was like, why the fuck can't we do this? Why can't we do that? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Now, you just mentioned the fact that you really desperately wanted to be able to take it out live. Obviously, we can imagine who your audience was at the Roxy. Who was your audience when you took Big Audio Dynamite out live?
I guess a lot of like-minded people that are also tapping into the cultural movements that were happening then. The reggae bass lines, because like New York was making, in the early 80s, New York, the whole, that scene's bubbling. And then you've got the whole UK, the whole prolific creativity of the UK anyway. Because, even the kind of electro thing, I mean, you can hear the whole keyboard thing going in there. It kind of signposted the way that music was heading. I think we you dig it. This shit's from, when is it?
1985.
85, it's not bad. If you look at what's going on now, I mean, the stuff that excites me today, it's usually about the bass line. It's about the beats. There's the MC styling that's still obviously a predominant thing. So yeah, I guess it just it kind of signposted the way that the multicultural mix was heading.
And obviously being in bands where certain individuals are famous in a kind of genuinely worldwide way, do you have any thoughts that you could transmit to our friends here about how to manage that? How do you keep band dynamics going in a positive direction against certain difficulties that come with fame?
Are you talking about internally within a band? Don't have one. Be on your own. It's funny, when you work with a bunch of individuals, I have this weird theory. I have a lot of weird theories. That's why you shouldn't smoke. All the bands that I dig, nearly all the bands that I dig, have this kind of magical 7 to 8 year period. And then after that, it becomes kind of repetitious or something. And if you dig the Clash, or you don't know who I like, but
Who do you
Public
like?
Enemy, Led Zeppelin, Beatles, Smiths. I don't know. I could go on and on. As I said, the Clash, the Pistols, all quite short periods of creativity. And I think that's because when you're with a group of people, it's hard to grow as an individual. So, when the Clash split up, or I don't know, whoever, Beatles, Public Enemy, I actually don't see that as a negative thing. I actually see it as part of the creative process, that to grow as an individual, you have to step out of the confines of being in a group. And I'm actually suspicious of bands that are together too long. There are a few exceptions. I mean, some might cite the Stones, but a lot of people would say their best period was in about that. You dig it out, like a 7-year period. I mean, U2, I'm not that crazy about them, but you've got to hand it. They haven't done too bad at reinventing themselves. Not really my speed, but hey, Bowie ain't done too bad reinventing himself. But it ain't about longevity. I don't think so. It's about, you kind of, if you're lucky in life, you get a window opportunity, you use it to the best of your ability, and then you should fuck off and let someone else have a go. Really.
Unless, of course, you're documenting what's going on rather than actually creating it yourself.
Well, luckily I was talking about bands.
I know, and that was a neat segue. Did you not see what I did there?
And I'm autonomous. I'm not dealing with anybody else. It's all about moi.
One film I did want to ask you about was, I heard once about a go-go film that never happened or didn't happen, or I'm not quite sure.
It got made, but basically Chris Blackwell, who was the man behind Harder They Come, there was a scene going off in Washington, D.C., early 80s. Go-go, anybody familiar with it? Check it out if you've got time.
And some rice and beans.
Huh?
Sorry, that's just showing
She's got
off.
it about Trouble Funk, one of its main proponents, and Chuck Brown, I Need Some Money, no? Damn, I'm in a room full of sperm.
We have some Washington. We have some Washington in the house, don't we?
Anyway, Blackwell wanted to do for go-go what Harder They Come did for reggae. Didn't work. I mean, this scene was so hot, so jumping, really percussive. The Junkyard Band, anybody know? Anyway, it was this thing that you actually couldn't get on film, and they tried to, and I was involved in the music scenes, but the film didn't really work.
So, but does it?
But again, sorry, just me to finish. But again, that go-go scene went on to inform swing beat and New Jack Swing, and actually got absorbed by hip-hop as well.
So what I'm interested, though, is what you can tell us about that go-go world, because you must have been there in Washington if you were part of the sort of early part of the documenting of it.
Okay.
So can you, again, it's just out of interest, really. You were there, you saw it with your own eyes.
Oh, man, it's a go-go night. It's a trip, because these bands would get on stage, and these bands ain't small. We're not talking 4 people. We're talking more like 40 people. And they'd get on stage, and they'd work it, and it would be one long jam from, like, I don't know, 10 o'clock to, like, 3. And it didn't seem to have any inconceivable break. And it was a lot of horns, a lot of percussion, because a lot of the band members apparently had got their musical training from school bands. So, like I say, horns, percussion, and call and response was a big part of it. I mean, it's like the audience were actually part of the band. And, oh man, the go-go, it was such a trip. The film was called Good to Go, and I've heard that there are bootleg copies. There might even be bits of it on YouTube. But what was interesting about Go-Go, it was almost too hot for celluloid. It was almost too hot for vinyl. I mean, there are Go-Go compilations out there, and Chuck Brown's I Need Some Money. You probably know it and you don't realize it. And Trouble Funk, you know, well worth checking out. Drop the Bomb, Reds and the Boys. I can't think of what else, but anyway, long time ago for me.
But that was one of the things you think, one of those music scenes or worlds that actually made much more sense in the event than it did in any representation of it.
It didn't work translated anywhere else. I mean, I think the bands did try and tour, but it was a strictly grassroots thing. Amazing.
Yeah, no, I bet. And some nice little tips there as well for if people fancy going on a little go-go journey to follow up on some of those things. Some of those people that you just mentioned.
Yeah, Trouble Funk particularly.
So, I guess you just mentioned people were in school bands. Were you ever in a school band?
No, I'd been able to play something if I was.
Yeah, of course, because you didn't play anything. I remember. Sorry,
far too much effort.
Yeah.
I was busy chasing girls, and they would run too because I said I was fat and four-eyed. So I spent a lot of time chasing.
Now, obviously, I mean, you've brought various bits of footage with you.
Yeah.
Did you want to show us something, or do you want to play us something else, or should we talk
You
about your
Would,
compilations, or
oh, man,
shall we talk about? I mean, you know, we're going to hand it over to you guys fairly soon, so you can ask Don some questions.
I mean, all right, let me show you a little couple of clips. This is a short clip, just Joe Strummer talking about the punky reggae connection. Light somebody, please.
This was the first club for punk
Light somebody.
groups and their followers.
A little bit of hip hop. Where are we up to?
So a couple more questions from me before we hand it out to you guys. I know it's kind of like asking which is your favourite child, but which of the pieces of film that you've done do you feel most proud of?
Oh, interesting. Okay. There's a movie I made. This one you can go out and try and borrow or steal, because I'm really proud of it. It's a thing called Dancehall Queen, which was a drama. It's not a documentary. Acting and everything. And I'm particularly proud of that because, as I told you, heard the whole Harder They Come thing back earlier in this conversation. And when I first decided I wanted to make a film, I wanted to basically make a film that spoke about my culture. I was actually hoping that the first feature film I made would be London-based and talked about the whole duality of my existence. As it turned out, that wasn't to be. And I ended up making a film for Chris Blackwell called Dancehall Queen. That's all set in the dancehall scene. It's got Beanie Man and a bunch of people in it. But what was interesting is, I actually saw it in mini DV, which is before Feston. You guys up on the whole Feston thing? Fuck it. Okay, so I made it with cameras that are this big, and the thing looks great, I've got to tell you. But what was really interesting is that I happened to connect with the culture and the people of the island. And today, if you ask a young person in Jamaica, what's the most famous movie in Jamaica, they'll tell you Dancehall Queen. I mean, for me, Harder They Come will always be the bollocks, the #1 film. But for young people, Dancehall Queen is the film about Jamaica. And as somebody that wasn't born there, that grew up in this country, you know, I can't help but be touched by that. And then I did a film about 5 years ago called Punk Attitude, which I basically did to kind of put punk into context, to show people that it was bigger than the music. It wasn't this weird thing that just happened in the late 70s. It has heritage, it has lineage, and it's the birthright of all young people. If you all are brave enough and you've got a good idea, you can be part of it too. Nobody's missed anything. It's all out there for the grabbing. I don't see too much grabbing going on right now, but it's definitely out there. So Punk Attitude was basically to talk about punk as an ongoing dynamic. Can I show you a clip? Because I'm really proud of it, because I know that when people watch this thing, I've seen young people walk out and they kind of get it and they're fired up and they want to get involved. Anyway. All right, let me see if I can get this going. Boom, boom. Boom. Come on, please. And then boom, boom. Lights, please.
My attitude to culture, it changed my attitude to...
Thank you.
I think that speaks for itself, and I think it's definitely time to get you to ask some questions. Who would like to ask Mr. Letts something?
Hey, I wanted to ask you, what can you tell me about the Lee Perry Clash collaboration?
I can tell you that Lee Perry thought that record was terrible. He said that they ruined it. And to be honest with you, the track that was released, I don't know how much of a Lee Perry production that really was. It was something that the guys had always wanted to do, but the reality of it didn't turn out as good as they wanted. I think a lot of times when you hear these super groups and this great guy is going to get together with this great guy, quite often it doesn't work. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of these, what do they call it? Not community projects, what do you call them? Collaborative projects that, I don't know, for me they don't really work. In most cases they don't work. Why that is, I don't know. You know, maybe you need somebody in there that's saying, no, this is the way it goes. And when everybody's trying to compromise, it waters down the original idea. I don't know why. But collaborative ideas,
Yeah, okay. But was it Clash's idea, or was it
oh
Lee
yeah.
Perry?
Oh yeah, definitely the Clash. I mean, like I say, they'd been fans of Lee Perry and Jamaican music. So obviously when you get an opportunity and you have some money, you pursue your dream. Dream was a bit of a nightmare.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, who's next?
Hey, I remember before you were talking about with that record that you were working on in the toilet and you really hated it, and you were feeling that you had some problems with Rastafarianism.
Yeah.
I was wondering what some of those problems were.
I think the problems that I had, and again, this was about me being kind of a lost generation, growing up in the 70s, trying to find something that was mine. But it was the extremes, and I think the extremes of any religion are ultimately dangerous because they border on fundamentalism. So as a young man, you know, there's a lot of those things I just couldn't accept and couldn't deal with. We're talking about kind of religious dogma that, like I say, it's not particular to just Rastafari. I think in all the religions, you know, there's extremes and there's moderates. And the extremities. I mean, I remember one day going down to around to a Rasta church, and I took Ariana from the Slits, as this white girl with dreadlocks. And first of all, they were freaked out that I brought her around in the first place. And then we're smoking the pipe, and I passed the pipe to Ariana, and they're like, "No, Rasta, you can't." And I'm like, "Get the fuck out! What's wrong, woman, woman?" I'm like, "Get the," you know, sorry, excuse my language. But basically, I wasn't prepared to blindly follow rules that had been laid down for me. I wanted, to this day, I'll decide what's good or bad for me, you know what I mean? And yeah, that was it. It was those kind of dilemmas. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's about not blindly following. That's what I'm talking about. Like man said in the film, interpretation. You know, make it work for you.
A lot of what you've talked about kind of stems from, I guess, the culture clash of what happened in the 60s in the UK, and
70s.
70s, sorry.
Yeah, that's right.
Apologies.
That's all right.
And talking about kind of very specific areas and very small communities that came together. For us now, I mean, we're all from all over the world, and we're kind of, I guess, united by the internet. But it also means that there are. It's rare to find very small communities in very specific places.
Yeah.
Do you see that culture clash is happening internationally? Do you think it's been watered down by the internet, or do you think it's strengthened by the internet?
See, this is a damn good question. Really good question, because there's a debate going on right now about the negative sides of all that we've opened up, all that we've unleashed. We're talking about the digital age and how it's shrunk the planet. We're talking about the fact that you know, the means of production are now in the hands of the people. Fundamentally a good idea. Having said that, I'm going to say something that's kind of radical now that I never dreamed I'd hear myself say. But I've come to the horrible conclusion that art was better when shit was more expensive. And I'll tell you why. Back in my day, which is a long, long time ago, if you wanted to start a group and you wanted to get a guitar, you had to save up for £100 or whatever. You know, a lot of money to get your guitar. You had to save up a lot of money to get your amplifier. By the time you'd been through that process, you know, it was only the people that really had determination and good ideas that really could do that and actually deliver. A lot of the people, it kind of weeded out the people that were messing around. You understand? You had to have some commitment. There was some pain, there was some struggle, there was some passion. Affordable technology has removed all that. I want to be in a band, oh, I'll get a laptop, a garage band. Oh, I don't like that, fuck it, I'll be a graphic designer. It ain't that simple. The downside of affordable technology, I don't care what any of you all say, is mediocrity. Just because you can afford it, don't mean you can do it. And that's what we're suffering from now. Plus, this whole thing of, you know, information being exchanged like that, and what it's done is homogenized everything. And you're absolutely right. It is hard to find anything that has that kind of spark of individuality. Why? Because we're all reading from the same book. You know, do you know who Orson Welles is, anybody? Yeah. Okay, well, I don't know. Dude, a lot of you guys are kind of Quentin Tarantino people. Orson Welles once said, I like Quentin, Orson Welles once said, and try and dig it, if you want to make a truly original movie, don't watch films. Can you dig it? You dig where he's coming from? And I think we're suffering from that thing now. Everybody's like, they all know the same shit. It's all just information. The pain and the struggle's been removed from the equation. And that's why I say that the culture of the West, for the most part, has become increasingly conservative. That's why I say that. You know, and what the answer is, I really don't know, man. You know, I don't know what the answer is. I figure the shit will work itself out at some point. But for me, you know, at the end of the 50s, end of the 60s, end of the 70s, end of the 80s, there were these big cultural upheavals. And at the end of the 90s, that didn't happen. And why that is, I don't know the answer. I think technology's got something to do with it, funny enough. You know, and there's definitely a backlash that's due, but man, is it overdue. You know what I mean? It feels like it should have happened 10 years ago. And I do wonder if that's something to do with, you know, sometimes I think, well, if Apple Mac had been around in the 60s, McCartney wouldn't have met Lennon. You know they are. Because they would have been in their bedrooms doing it on their own. Because the thing about a computer, it's a facilitator. What's wrong with a computer? It won't tell you when an idea is shit. And that's where you need human beings. You need that chemical, organic thing of people being in a room and sparking off each other. I don't know how much you can spark off a computer.
It's kind of interesting in that you can have that exchange from the other side of the world now, if you choose to. In that you can,
yes, yeah, you
I
can.
can communicate with you from wherever I am in the world, and you can tell me it's shit from wherever you are in the world, or whatever. But also, there's almost no sense of very, very specific or think like kind of. I mean, okay, this isn't entirely true, but there's less of a sense of sounds that are entirely specific to like. Say even like a suburb of London or a place that come together with other places because we can all listen to things with such immediacy.
Exactly, and I think that's it's homogenized everything. Like I say, to find true originality is very difficult, and I think what you have to do is look outside the box. I mean, I believe that all the creative ideas in the future will come from the amateur and the naive. People aren't reading the same book, aren't all watching MTV. Do you get what I'm saying? And luckily I get to travel and I do see things that seem to be coming out of somewhere totally left of centre, man. And it's because they haven't got the internet and they haven't got MTV. Having said that, you know, I've got all this stuff. I've got the iPods, the internet, and it has a part to play, undoubtedly. But I think we need to we need to be pulling the reins, not the other way around. And that, I think, is part of the problem with culture in the West, I have to say, generally now. So we're agreeing, I hope we're agreeing. Yeah, no. And there's one of the guys that invented all this shit, I don't know if it's the internet or something or Google, one of them just put out a book that's actually looking at the problems, you know. I mean, not to mention, it's hard for you all to make money now because everyone's downloading everything for free. And me personally, I don't believe there's anything wrong with getting paid for a good idea. You know, I ain't that naive. There's nothing wrong getting paid. You know, as long as you ain't fucking anybody else over for it, nothing wrong, and you should get paid for your ideas, I think. Well, apparently there's other ways, and you know, it's all about. I don't know, dude. Don't ask me, because I'm too old to be affected by that shit. Well, actually, it's not true, because the same way the digital age has had an impact on the music industry, it's had the same impact on the film industry. And earlier I mentioned something about hustling, and you know, I got a little name, I got a little profile. But on a day-to-day basis, I'm hustling like everybody else. I mean, it's a creative hustle, but it's still a hustle. You know, people tell me they're working in media now. I offer them my condolences. You know. Anyway, any more questions, anybody? Don't let me put you off anything. I hope I'm not. I hope I'm firing you up to go out and do something. But do it properly.
Okay, so when you showed us that film clip, it started going into, you know, different ways that modern society still kind of represents punk idealism. And someone said, oh, you know, even the internet is kind of, I mean, this kind of touches back on the last question too. But of course, globalization has bad points, which is like homogenizing everything. But now people that don't have like-minded individuals around them finally have access to people that think like they do. So that's kind of one good aspect.
No, I mean, sorry, you haven't finished.
Oh,
Go
yeah.
on.
So then I was thinking that one thing that the internet has kind of provided that's almost beneficial is that it's taken power away from major record labels, where now with people having access to more independent music because of the internet, these record labels are starting to hold less power, and then now people might have access to, you know, less pop, commercialized, corporately presented music. So in that sense, do you find the internet actually provides something a little positive?
Oh, no, listen, you're right and he's right. It has all those potentials and it does do all those things. But I think the overall effect of it, I mean, it's like one step forward and two steps back. And in a weird way, you're absolutely both right. You know, it did give people the opportunity to talk to one another. But then if you look at any given time, what's actually on the internet what do they call it, the information superhighway, half the time it's pornography and ego.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I tell you what it is, I tell you another one of my stone conclusions. Technology ain't the problem.
Technology is always the solution.
Technology is not the problem. What's the problem?
People.
It's the people. Really simple. Machines are great, people are crap. I said it. Anybody else? I'm serious too. Did you have to? I can hear you all. You need a mic? Can anybody not hear me? I can hear you.
But the reason we keep the mic
Oh, the film,
for
the film.
everybody else in the world
Okay.
watching it on the internet.
On a bit of a different note, I dabble in filmmaking as well as making music.
That's what we need, more piranha in the tank. I'm joking, dude. I'm joking.
And I recently read a book by American playwright and film director David Mamet, Three Uses of the Knife, and there's an interesting kind of correlation that he makes in the book about music and film editing, and about how the bass line in film is a lot like writing a plot in a script, or developing the plot in a documentary or a film.
Yep.
I was wondering, because you're very bass line centric as well as a filmmaker, and I'm wondering, what kind of connections do you see in well, I guess the broad art of storytelling and, you know, kind of time-based art? How do you
correlate the two?
Yeah, exactly.
You know something? I've never ever thought about it. Again, maybe it's a bit of a cop-out, but it's an instinctive, intuitive thing. And I know the two things enhance one another, and if you do it right, it's a beautiful thing. Why? I don't know. I mean, I guess it's something to do with what we are. I mean, you know, as human beings, the two things work, they complement each other, don't they? So I guess it's capitalizing on that 1-2 combination of sight and sound. But I've never actually really sat down and analyzed even bass. Why does bass appeal to me? Why does, you know, bass connect people to each other and, I believe, to the planet? I believe it's something primeval. It's tribal. But the scientific reason, I have no idea. Don't even care. All I know is I kind of feel it. You know what I mean? I'm not a great one for putting things under a microscope. Maybe a mistake. You know, I'm not advocating that for anybody else. But I don't tend to overanalyze. I follow my instincts, and to this day, they haven't really led me astray. You know, even, you know, conversations about punk rock, and I mean, punk, ultimately, the more you talk about it, the more ridiculous it gets. Ultimately, you know, really, you shouldn't really talk about it. You've got to go out there and do it, you know.
Thanks.
I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I hope I tried to, man.
I'm not sure if I really had a good question. I just
Okay.
thought it was, thought it was something to discuss. Or
I know. You know what's interesting? You just told me that whole Mamet and him turning into bass. That's interesting to me, so you've turned me on. He makes some David Mamet, great films.
I think
Anybody
we've got time
else?
for one or two. You had a question, didn't you? So if we pass the mic over here, and then I guess.
I'll wait for the mic, even though like I'm in your face. Hey, where are you from?
From Canada.
Canada? Hey, we've all got problems. I'm joking, I'm joking, I'm joking. Are they going to show... I'm joking, dude. They're going to show my next film, which I'm just going to finish right now. You've got a thing called The North by Northwest?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're showing... Actually, they're showing another film I did called Carnival, and the film I'm just doing about a charity called Strummerville there.
Oh.
I love Toronto, though.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm from Montreal.
Top, I told you we got problems.
Close enough.
Go on.
Yeah, speaking of films, you were talking about the BAD record and Jim Jarmusch making the video. So how did that go down? Because I really love like Jim Jarmusch.
Jim, he's the man. He's actually the godfather of one of my children. He was a fan of the band. Yeah, he was a fan of the band. And basically, you know, when a song came up, we turned around and said, Jim, do you want to? And he did it for us. So we were very lucky. You know, but the band, we attracted a lot of interesting people. I mean, you know, what's his name? Rick Rubin remixed a lot of our records. You know, yeah, you know. Okay, you know. So if you're making the right sounds, and I guess you're doing stuff that's interesting, you attract interesting people. I guess is the lesson from that. Because listen, we were never ultimately that commercially successful. Had a few charts hits here, but on the college scene in America, we were the bomb. You know, and back in the day, the college scene and that college circuit is where all the really cool bands broke. I don't know if that's the case anymore, but anyway. So the basics, you attract like-minded people by being brave and individual. You attract those kind of people, I guess.
Thank you.
I would just personally like to ask you one other thing before we wrap up, and that's just about something that happened the other week, because we had you as our Master of Ceremonies at the Culture Clash Sound Clash at the Roundhouse, and I would just like to ask you what your observations of the night were.
Man, that Red Bull Music Academy Culture Clash was amazing. Back in the day, that's how it used to be. You'd rent a church hall or wherever, and the sound systems, Coxsone and Saxon, Shaka would be all in the room. And I haven't seen anything like that for about 25 years. That was a very special moment. You had 4 generations of bass culture there, going all the way back to the 60s, right up to where we are now with the whole dubstep thing. The thing that connected them all was the bass line. And yeah, it was a trip. You had to be there. Again, these events, it's hard to talk about them, vocalize them. It's something you have to... Anybody go? Anybody go to that? They just fly you in for these things and fly you out? Is that how it works?
This is term 2. That was term 1.
Oh, I don't know. Okay. They filmed it anyway, and it was really something special. And again, it was interesting for me to see how my culture, and I should say Jamaica's bass culture, which is their gift to the world, has had this impact on places like the UK to the point of actually changing this country's identity, man. Do you know what I mean? I mean, England wouldn't be the England that you know without the input of Jamaicans. Well, the West Indians, I've got to say that. And, you know, I mean, I'd like to claim it all for me, but, you know, the Asian community and you know, we've all had a part to play. And I think that multicultural mix, the people that dig that are the people that are really going to put the great back in Britain. Because, you know, I ain't going to lie to you all, it ain't the kind of this multicultural dream. I mean, it's like that in London and a few other cities. But we got troubles too, like everybody else. You know, I mean, we got right-wing motherfuckers and that trying to break it up. But at a grassroots level, you've seen how music, particularly, and culture, has united the people for the better. And, you know, it is pushing things forward. You know, I mean, I love this city, man. It's so creative. And it's because of its embracing of the multicultural mix, I think. So it's worked for us.
Absolutely. I think Melissa Bradshaw wrote a feature about sound system culture in the Daily Note, the newspaper we're doing here, and pointed out that sound system culture turned English people from kind of, you know, sort of church-going sandwich eaters into ravers. And I think I agree with her.
Yeah, and I mean, even and a lot of the sonic experiments that come out of Jamaica have become part of the fabric of pop music. You know, the emphasis on the bass line, beats, you know, the MC, the using the mixing desk as an instrument, you know, even the extended remix, all that stuff started in Jamaica. And if you look at a map and see how tiny Jamaica is, it's a tiny little dot, and then look at its impact on the world. It's funny that for a country that spent so many years under British rule and colonization, Jamaica has now culturally colonized the planet in a strange way. I mean, if you know your musical history, you'll understand that rap is directly connected to Jamaica. You know what I mean? That's the biggest selling genre on the planet right now, even though it ain't saying as much as it could be, but that's another story. Yeah, that's it. I can't remember what I was saying.
No, that's okay. Well, I guess, are you around for a little bit, or do you have to
I'm good for a little while if somebody's got a question.
Well,
yeah.
I guess we should finish up, but if anyone does have a question that they haven't asked now, feel free to come and
Approach me.
ask your question directly, person to person.
I got a question.
What's that?
What's that funky smelling thing I just picked up? I was a joss stick. Smell me. What is it?
It's like patchouli.
But, oh, that's going to ruin my cred, man. Damn.
You come in punk, you leave patchouli.
Yeah, I
John
leave a
Letts,
hippie.
Thank you very much.
Oh. Thank you.